In the world of gospel music, we're used to voices that heal, uplift, and inspire. But this time, the spotlight isn't on unity or harmony, it's on a clash so shocking that it's shaking the very foundation of the gospel community. What started as whispers has now erupted into a storm, and the names at the center of it will leave you stunned. This isn't just another feud. It's a battle of influence, integrity, and truth playing out in front of millions who never saw it coming. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the explosive confrontation that has turned the gospel world upside down. And trust me, once you hear the full story, you'll understand why this drama is impossible to ignore. Jonathan McReynolds, the Grammy-winning artist with a gentle spirit and a voice that feels like a conversation with God, never built his career on hype or tradition. From the streets of Chicago to the biggest stages in gospel, his music carried honesty, vulnerability, and raw faith. Fans loved him because he was real, he didn't pretend to be perfect, didn't chase fame, and never bowed to church politics. For an entire generation, Jonathan became proof that you could worship God authentically without being locked inside outdated molds. But on the other side stood Juanita Bynum, a name that had already been etched into gospel history long before Jonathan's rise. She wasn't just a preacher, she was a firestorm. Her unforgettable sermons like No More Sheets shook nations, demanding holiness and truth with a voice that millions believed was prophetic. Bold, fearless, and uncompromising, she built a reputation as one of the most powerful prophetesses of her time. And when Jonathan McReynolds' humility suddenly collided with Juanita Bynum's fire, it created a clash no one expected and one that gospel music fans are still struggling to process. However, debate accompanied such power. While some felt her statements were too harsh, others respected her passion. Nevertheless, her influence was undeniable. She spoke for a generation of leaders who thought that ministry should have clear boundaries, and she was not afraid to speak up when she thought that standards were being lowered. Juanita and Jonathan appeared to be from separate worlds. One was a singer-songwriter who used concerts and private worship sessions to engage young people. The other was a pastor who oversaw revival meetings, conferences, and pulpits. Their audiences, platforms, and styles were all entirely different. It was surreal, therefore, when these two names started to arise in the same conversation out of the blue. Let me tell you, no one ever imagined Jonathan would be facing someone as well known as Juanita. Here's the startling bit though. Despite their infrequent interactions, the roots of conflict were already present and concealed in their divergent approaches to ministry. And it would only take a single occasion or event to reveal those concealed distinctions to the public. It becomes intriguing at this point. There were no open arguments or outright insults at the start of the story. Something seemingly insignificant started it all. One of the largest gospel conferences of the year was scheduled. It was intended to unite both newer gospel fans and traditional churchgoers. Juanita was selected as the keynote speaker, while Jonathan was asked to sing as one of the main acts. On paper, everything appeared flawless, but stress was already beginning to build behind the scenes. The mood was electrifying when the conference night finally arrived. Expecting nothing but unity, inspiration, and worship, thousands of people crowded the auditorium. With his guitar in hand and his typical casual attire, Jonathan took the stage first. He gave his all during the concert, singing songs that seemed more like sincere prayers than like a show. There was warmth in his voice. He discussed personal challenges in his remarks. Before concluding, he gave a brief testimonial regarding the difficulties of maintaining one's composure in a highly enticing industry. The audience adored it. People shouted appreciation, sobbed, and clapped. It appeared for a little time that the conference would be remembered as a lovely evening of ministry and music. However, destined Disney took a surprising turn. Juanita's imposing presence took center stage later that same evening. Her comments initially sounded like any other sermon, bold, impassioned, and flaming. Then she changed. In the pulpit and on stage, her tone became more acerbic and her message shifted to compromise. She talked about preachers who introduced worldly spirits into places of worship, leaders who lacked consecration, and artists who were more concerned with winning over crowds than with winning God. Everyone in the room sensed the link, even though she never said Jonathan's name. After all, she spoke right after his performance, and the timing couldn't have been more ideal. Whispers drifted from row to row, weighing down the room's quiet. Phones were out in a matter of minutes. People started making videos and sharing them online. Social internet was inundated with captions. Was Jonathan the one she was pointing out? She was instantly defended by others who praised her for preserving holiness. Jonathan, meanwhile, didn't answer right away. He just avoided confrontation by maintaining his customary coolness. However, Jonathan ultimately broke his silence in his own way after the conference ended and the buzz spread to online channels. He shared a picture of himself in a studio on Instagram along with a thought-provoking comment. Don't confuse your beliefs with God's law. They are yours. The message was obvious even if he didn't name anyone or tag them. His target audience was fully aware of who and what he was talking about. The most absurd aspect was that the timing was perfect, and the artist who never dared to cause a stir in public, Jonathan, had now spoken up. Supporters hurried to his defense, lauding his intelligence and charm. However, several criticized him for being passive-aggressive, arguing that he ought to have addressed the matter directly in a caption. Once social media took hold of the feud, it could have ended there, but it quickly grew into a far bigger story than anyone had anticipated. This is how what first appeared to be a one-time conflict escalated into a full-fledged tempest that would engulf the gospel industry in contentious controversy. There was no going back after the conflict left the church's doors and into the social media sphere. Already, a fire had been ignited by Jonathan's Instagram post. Juanita, however, was not one to keep silent. A few days later, she spoke for about an hour live on Facebook while holding a Bible open in front of her. Although she never specifically mentioned Jonathan's name, her statements were forceful. She discussed leaders who were adored by everyone but were unprepared to bear the burden of anointing, and young artists who were gifted but lacked spiritual discipline. Her tone was composed but forceful, as though she wanted to convey that no matter who was insulted, her position would never change. The feud suddenly became more boisterous. Her live instructional videos became viral on YouTube and Instagram, with pages dissecting her remarks line by line. It becomes intriguing at this point. What began as a straightforward argument between two individuals has now become a public event. The gospel community became divided as fans made hashtags like Team Jonathan and Team Juanita. Juanita was correct, according to some, when she said that gospel musicians should never enter places of worship in a casual manner. Others retaliated, arguing that Jonathan's humility and sincerity brought people closer to God than traditions ever could. The performance was no longer the only topic of discussion. It was about the gospel culture's own future. What is unique about this story? Preaching and music weren't the only topics anymore. It turned into a conflict between new expression and tradition, between the new wave and the old guard. As the days went by, the back and forth started to resemble a game of chess. In his most recent video, Jonathan discussed diversity in ministry and how God employed various mediums for various ends. Without raising his voice or using derogatory language, he sneaked in a phrase that ignited the internet. The results of my mission, in my opinion, are more important to God than the fashion of my shirt. Those were powerful words. Everyone understood what he was talking about, and his supporters applauded him for maintaining his composure. However, this seemed like a direct challenge to Juanita's fans. Thus, the cycle went on. Every time Jonathan posted something on the internet, people analyzed it and questioned whether it was a joke. Juanita's words were scrutinized for hidden meanings each time she spoke. With each move they made, they continued to attract larger crowds, which made it both exciting and stressful. The most absurd aspect was that influencers, artists, and preachers began to join in as well. Others covertly liked postings or left comments that indicated which side they were on, while others openly supported one side. All of a sudden, this was more than simply a fight. A full-scale industry debate took place. This is the startling part, though. Something happened that would propel this fight into even greater prominence, just as the online arguments appeared to settle into predictable patterns. It was no longer going to remain hidden beneath Facebook Lives and Instagram posts. With cameras rolling and everyone watching, the gospel world was about to witness Jonathan and Juanita square off in the same room on the same night. And that's when destiny took a surprising turn. Instead of being a celebration of togetherness, music, and faith, the Atlanta Gospel Awards night served as the backdrop for the most memorable incident in the entire feud. Juanita and Jonathan were both invited, only a few tables away from one another. Whispers drifting from one side of the hall to the other filled the room. Everyone was aware of the past. Everyone was aware of the stress. In the back of people's minds, they were anticipating what would happen if these two ultimately met. You won't believe what happened that night. Juanita strode to the platform with the same poise she had usually exuded when she was asked to give an award. She began by congratulating the nominees and discussing the significance of maintaining Christ at the forefront of the industry. Her words then changed, though, glancing across the crowd, and several people pointed straight at Jonathan's table. We live in a time when some people think their freedoms are more important than their calling, when talent is worshipped more than God, and when gifting is confused with anointing, she said. However, I would like to remind all of the young ministers present that God's standards remain unchanged. The room went cold. Everyone's attention was instantly drawn to Jonathan. While some clapped and others remained silent, every second of his reaction was caught on camera, and people debated whether his slight smile indicated enjoyment, annoyance, or restraint as they watched it in slow motion online. However, things start to get interesting at this point. Jonathan didn't escape the strain when his time on stage came. He stepped directly into it. He halted after giving the audience a cordial greeting while holding a guitar. "I've been thinking a lot about how God calls us as we are, not as someone else thinks we should be," he remarked in a composed yet powerful voice. "If it is my responsibility to lead others to Jesus, I will do so in the manner that he intended. And if that irritates someone, perhaps they shouldn't have followed me in the first place." The room exploded. While some sat still, knowing exactly who those insults were directed at, others clapped with thunderous applause. After that, Jonathan sang one of his most stirring songs about sincerity and grace. The audience was standing by the conclusion of it. Stories clashed backstage. Others insisted it was utter quiet, while others asserted the two crossed paths and gave each other a brief nod. One thing was for sure, that evening, no public reconciliation took place. Blogs were already dissecting every glance, every statement, and every nuanced response by the time the event was over. With the explosion of videos and commentary on social media, the dispute had moved from rumors to unquestionable fact. This is the startling part, though. Now, the relationship between Jonathan and Juanita was far more significant than the two of them. One artist and one prophetess were no longer the sole topics of discussion. It had evolved into a discussion on the gospel's own future. Was it time for the establishment to embrace new forms of ministry, or had the younger generation gone too far away from the path of holiness? This story is unique because it began as a conference dispute and evolved into a cultural earthquake that rocked an entire industry. The most absurd aspect is that this fight compelled everyone to choose a side, regardless of whether they supported Juanita's authority or Jonathan's sincerity. And fate took a surprising turn, causing division within the gospel community that no one could have foreseen. So, the issue still stands. Where are you at? Do you support Jonathan's belief in new forms of religious expression? Or do you support Juanita in her unwavering defense of traditional values? The gospel world will not quickly forget this dispute, so please share your thoughts in the comments section.